Right, to analyze the unfolding situation in the Middle East and the potential role that Türkiye can play to de-escalate tensions. Joining me now here in the studios is Mehmet Celik. He's the editorial coordinator at Daily Sabah. Mehmet, great to see you. So we're speaking exactly after 1 week. I remember talking to you the day Israel and the US attacked Iran. And obviously, over the past 7 days, we have seen the whole region getting embroiled in this wider conflict now. And yes, there have been calls for mediation, primarily from the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He has been calling for de-escalation in the region. And historically, we have seen Türkiye has played a very key role in de-escalation, especially when it comes to this region. So picking up on what I was speaking about with Andrew Hopkins there, what role realistically Türkiye can play right now?
Well, of course, Turkey's leverage over both in this specific conflict, diplomatically over Iran and the United States is very strong. How do we know that? I mean, when we look at the relationship between Mr. Erdogan and Donald Trump, and when we look at Turkey's relations with Iran, we can see that Turkey's influence over both actors is very impactful. Why do I say that? It is because despite the European position on Iran, despite the US and Israeli position on Iran, Turkey always maintained good relations with the Iranian regime, despite the fact that Turkey and Iran even have some differences when it comes to regional matters. And that the same goes with the United States. Now, Turkey has this leverage not only because Turkey and Iran have been neighbors for centuries and our borders have not changed, but also it has a lot to do with Turkey's strength at many different levels. Now, when we look at the map in our screen, in the neighborhood of Turkey, we can see that there's fire in many different areas. But despite the neighborhood, be it in Ukraine and Russia conflict or southern in the areas in the Middle East, south of Turkey, Turkey is still a very safe haven for investment. And that has a lot to do, Jafar, with the political stability in Turkey. And also the fact that Turkey has developed itself is not only stable politically, but over the past 20 years, Turkey has seen a very strong growth in terms of economic activity, in terms of defense industry, which are all deterrence factors from let's say Iran to attack Turkey and bring Turkey into this fire that has been going on in our region. I think Turkey, you were talking about the FDI coming into Turkey in an environment where there is no political stability, in an environment where there is no security, in an environment particularly when there is no effective infrastructure for economic activity and financial activity, FDI will not come in. And Turkey has been able to maintain, has been able to establish these stabilities, but also has been able to maintain, despite having Syria as a Syrian civil war along its border, which continued for over a decade, despite having Iraq instability, despite tensions between Iran and Israel, despite the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Regardless of even the Ukraine war, Turkey was able to maintain relations between, let's say, the US administration and Moscow. So this has a lot to do with the prestige, but also with the geopolitical situation where Turkey is located. And also, I would say that the biggest credit is due to Mr. Erdogan, who has been able to maintain a very pragmatic relation with different leaders around the world. That's why Turkey has been a very active mediator, not only in Ukraine and Russia, not only in between Israel, between United States and Iran, but Turkey has been very successful in mediating between Ethiopia and Somalia, between Ethiopia and Egypt. And Turkey has also intervened in the conflict between Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Right, so there are multiple success that President Erdogan has achieved over the past many years when it comes to bringing down tensions, not just in the region, but the wider world. Talking about Iran and the US, you see, here's the thing, this is how I'm looking at it. When it comes to Turkey and Iran, I think while there may be differences on certain things, okay, One thing that I think both sides can agree on, I think both blame Iran for starting this
You mean
conflict. Sorry, I mean Israel. Yeah. Both blame Israel for starting this conflict. For example, we heard from Turkish President Erdogan there that it's Israel that's poisoning the region, and I think this is something that the Iranians would agree with. To what extent do you think this single factor can help Turkey in bringing down tensions between the U.S. and Iran?
Look, you mentioned that Turkey and Iran has differences when it comes to, let's say in Syria, we were on the opposing sides. But certain issues for the regional countries are beyond bilateral politics. And I think Israel's destabilizing policy for the region, many countries around the region are on the same page. And of course, regardless of the tensions between Iran and Israel, Turkey and Iran look at the issue when it comes to the occupied territories in Palestine are very similar. So this, I think, brings them on the same page to see that the source of the problem is not perhaps Iran, but it's Israel's ambitions for Iran, Israel's ambitions in terms of a regime change perhaps in Iran. And I think, you know, when they're on the same page, then Turkey can perhaps use this leverage with the United States to say, you know, let's find a common ground, but sidelining Israel is still a big problem when it comes to the Israeli influence on the United States. So, yes, Turkey has a big, perhaps, influence in this differences between the United States and Iran, but Israel as a destabilizer, Israel as a very influential actor over the U.S. policy of Iran still maintains a big obstacle. And I think this is why, despite diplomatic efforts, still a diplomatic chance, a diplomatic exit has not been achieved. But nevertheless, I think it's important to highlight that diplomacy is a means. It's not an end in itself. Diplomacy must continue regardless of all the attacks. There's a lot of reports regarding Saudi Arabia even being involved in this. I think, you know, one thing, if I may highlight, is that having simple good relations is not enough to achieve something diplomatically. Having good bilateral relations with, you know, many countries have relations among themselves due to cultural ties, due to economic ties. But having a strong political leader is very important. Having a military, I mean, Turkey is the second largest military in NATO, is very impactful, so that when you are negotiating, when you're trying to mediate, when you're trying to have influence diplomatically, you are also giving the trust that political leadership is backing this, that military might is still there to secure some of the differences between the parties.
Mehmet, we're running out of time, but we really want to ask you this one question. What about the personal diplomacy angle here? Because President Erdogan is a world leader. He is highly respected in the region, especially in the Muslim world. What do you think his personal diplomacy can produce for this war?
Well, I think when it comes to, you know, many different wars, Mr. Erdogan's leader-to-leader diplomacy has been very fruitful. I mean, look at how Turkey was involved in terms of grain deal, in terms of prisoner exchange in Ukraine conflict, and also other conflicts that we just mentioned. Mr. Erdogan has good relations with the leadership of Iran. And I think the fact that Mr. Erdogan and Donald Trump are on the same page when it comes to several different dossiers in the region can also play a very influential role in this conflict as well. I mean, as our correspondent from Tehran said, Turkey hasn't been attacked like the Gulf countries have been attacked. And that has a lot to do with Turkey's diplomatic influence over Iran and that relationship that the Turkish leadership has established with the Iranian side. As I said, Turkey and Iran, despite the fact that they are even considered as rivals in the region at certain times, our borders and our policies have been shaped in a way that neither side get close to a confrontational level.
Fascinating insights, Mehmet Celik. Thanks very much for joining me here in the studios. As always, really appreciate your taking out the time. And now, if you're just tuning into our rolling coverage here on TRT World, let's bring you up to speed on the latest developments that have taken place over the past few hours.